Welcome, everyone. Time to start services here on this 29th day of the first month. We have a new moon coming up on the second day of the week, otherwise known as Monday. So we'll see you back here in a couple of days, Yah willing. And based on our reckoning, we're in the 41st year of the 40th Jubilee. So it would appear that we are coming up on the end time events of Yah's plan, but we do see through that glass darkly, so it'll be interesting to see how things unfold, and we're definitely going to keep our eyes open. I'd like to start services by asking Mr. Daly if he would please open in prayer. James?
Yes, thank you. Yehovah, our Father, come before you at the beginning of this Sabbath afternoon to study your word and your way. And we can see these end days and time events preparing to culminate. We know it's categorized as the worst time in history. So we've made a lot of effort to protect ourselves the best we can. And those that we're able to help, we try to. So we ask you please to watch us and protect us so we don't fall short and keep solid in your way of life and understand love correctly. We know that love means keeping your commandments, or includes keeping your commandments and your knowing you and your way. So we ask for good understanding or comprehension. We give you the greatest appreciation for the knowledge we've received, and we make our very best efforts to follow everything that we know and understand completely or properly. So we give you the greatest appreciation and thanks for this understanding and this knowledge that most of mankind, perhaps unknowingly, does not understand. Perhaps it's well withheld from them. So we'll continue till our last breath at putting out this knowledge of who you are and what you desire of man. And you will allow a bit of trial and tribulation to come upon the whole earth. We know and we're ready for these tests, these trials. And please strengthen us so that we can hold up under whatever stress we're subjected to and what's coming shortly, I would think. So we give you can't give enough appreciation and thanks for the understanding that we've received. We hope we're doing what you want. We make our best efforts. If there's anything that we're missing and have incorrect in any way, if you please give us a correction so that we can see where we may have misunderstood something or misapplied it, and so we're on the right path. So we give you thanks and ask for all of this, please, by the authority of your Son, Jesus the Christ. Amen.
Amen to that. Thank you, James. So if you'll remain standing and open up your hymnals, we'll have our first hymn, which is on page number 2. On page number 2, we'll sing a hymn that comes from Psalm 2, coincidentally. Why do the nations make plans in vain? And I think you'll start to see a theme in today's hymns, but page 2, why do the nations make plans in vain? Okay, that's a good start. If you'll just turn over or look over on the next page, in page 3, we'll sing our next hymn, which comes from Psalm 4, Trust in Yah and Stand in Awe, after which we'll turn the mic over to Mr. Wes Head to bring us the weekly news update. But first we'll sing page 3, Trust in Yah and Stand in Awe. And open your hymnals to page 11. On page 11 we will sing His Eyes Behold the Children of Men, after which we'll bring Wes back to the mic to read in the book of Romans chapters 10 through 12. But first, His eyes behold the children of men. Okay, if you'll be seated, we'll turn the mic back over to Wes to read in the book of Romans chapters 10 through 12. Wes?
You got me?
Yep.
Okay. I lost my bookmarker. I found it. Chapter 10. Brothers, my heart desires and prayer to God for the Israelites is that they may be saved. For I can testify about them that they are zealous for God. But their zeal is not based on knowledge, since they did not know the righteousness that comes from God and sought to establish their own. They did not submit to God's righteousness. Christ is the end of the law, and so that there may be righteousness for everyone who believes. Moses described in this way the righteousness that is by the law. The man who does these things will live by them. But the righteousness that is by faith says, do not say in your heart, who will ascend into heaven? That is to bring Christ down, or who will descend into the deep? That is to bring Christ up from the dead. But what does it say? The word is near you. It is in your mouth and in your heart. That is the word of faith we are. I lost my place. Proclaiming that if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe. Why am I having a hard time? I'm having a hard time keeping my place. And believe, okay. In your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For it is with your heart that you believe and are justified, and it is with your mouth that you confess and are saved. As the scripture says, everyone who trusts in him will never be put to shame. For there is no difference between Jew or Gentile. The same Lord is Lord of all and richly blesses all who call on him. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. What a promise. How then can they call on the one they have not believed in? And how can they believe in the one whom they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? And how can they preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. But now all the Israelites accept the good news. For Israel says, Lord, who has believed our message? Consequently, faith comes from hearing. And the message is heard through the word of Jesus Christ. But I ask, did they not hear? Of course they did. Their voice has gone out into all the earth, their words to the end of the world. Again, I ask, did Israel not understand? First, Moses say, I will make you envious by those who are not a nation. I will make you angry by a nation that has no understanding. An Israelite boldly says, I was found by those who did not seek me. I revealed myself to those who did not ask for me. But concerning Israel, he said, all day long I have held out my hand to a disobedient and abstaining people. Remnant of Israel, chapter 11. I asked them, did God reject his people? By no means. I am an Israelite myself. I descended from Abraham, from the tribe of Benjamin. God did not reject his people whom he foreknew. Do you know what the scripture says in that passage about Elijah? How he appeared to God against Israel? Lord, they have killed your prophets and torn down your altars, and I am the only one left, and they are trying to kill me. And what was God's answer to him? I have reserved for myself 7,000 who have not bowed the knee to Baal. So too, at the present time, there is a remnant chosen by grace. And if by grace, then it is no longer by works. If it were grace, it would no longer be grace. What then? What Israel sought to earnestly, it did not obtain. But the elect did. The others were hardened, as it is written. God gave them a spirit of spore, eyes so that they could not see, ears so that they could not hear, to this very day. And David said, may their table become a snare and a trap and a stumbling block and a retribution for them. May their eyes be darkened so that they cannot see, and their backs be bent forward. Verse 11. Grafted branch. Again I ask, did they stumble so as to fall beyond recovery? Not at all. Rather, because of their transgressions, salvation has come to the Gentiles to make Israel envious. But if their transgressions mean riches for the world, and their loss means riches for the Gentiles, how much greater riches will their fulfill bring? I'm talking to you, Gentiles. Inasmuch as I am the apostle of the Gentiles, I make much of my ministry in the hope that I may somehow arouse my own people to envy and save some of them. For if their rejection is the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead? If the part of the doubt offered a first fruit is holiness, then the whole bunch is holy. If the root is holy, then so are the branches. If some of the branches have been broken off, and you, through a wild olive shoot, have been grafted in among the others, and now share in the nourished sap from the olive root, do not boast over those branches. If you do, consider, let me change the page. This. You do not support the root, but the root supports you. You will say then, branches were broken off so that I could be grafted in. Granted by they who broke off because of unbelief. And you stand by faith. Do not be arrogant, but be afraid, for if God did not spare the new natural branch, he will not spare you either. Consider therefore the kindness and the sternness of God. Sternness to those who fell, but kindness to you. Provide that you continue in his kindness. Otherwise, you also will be cut off. And if they do not persist in unbelief, they will be grafted in, for God is able to graft them in again. After all, if you were cut out of an olive tree, then is wild by nature and contrary to the nature where grafted into cultivative olive trees, how much more readily will the natural branches be grafted into their own olive tree? All Israel will be saved. Boy, isn't that a promise? Verse 25. Excuse me, I got a tickle in my throat again. do not want you to be ignorant of this mystery, brothers, so that you may not be conceited. Israel has experienced a hardening in part until the full number of Gentiles has come. And so all Israel will be saved, as it is written. The deliverer will come from Zion. He will turn godliness away from the Jacob. And this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. Verse 28. This is, 28. As far as the gospel is concerned, they are enemies on your account. But as far as election is concerned, they are loved on account of the patriarchs. For God's gift and his call are irrevocable. Just as you, who were at one time disobedient to God, have now received mercy, and as a result of their disobedience, so they too have now become disobedient, in order that they too may now receive mercy as a result of God's mercy to you. For God has bound all men over to disobedience, so that he may have mercy on them all. Oh, the depth of the riches of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable in his judgment and his path beyond tracing out. Who has known the mind of the Lord? Or who has been in counselor? Who has ever given to God that God should repay him? For from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be glory forever. Amen. Chapter 12, living sacrifice. Therefore I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, to offer yourself, body, a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not conform any longer to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. For by his grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourselves more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with a sober judgment, in accordance with your measure of faith God has given you, just as each of us has one body with many members, and these members do not all have the same function. So in Christ, we who are many form one body, and each member belongs to all the others. We have different gifts according to the grace given us. If a man's gift is prophecy, let him use it in portion to his faith. If it is serving, let him serve. If it is teaching, let him teach. If it is encouraging, let him encourage. If it is contributing to the needs of others, let him give generously. If it is leadership, let him govern diligently. If it is showing mercy, let him do it cheerfully. Love, verse 9. Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spirits favored, serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patience in affliction, faithful in prayers. Share with God's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn for those who mourn. Live in harmony with one with another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of lower positions. Do not be conceited, Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everybody. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my friends, but leave room for God's wrath. Yes, for it is written, it is my avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemies are hungry, feed them. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but be overcome evil with good. Okay, that's the end of the loop. Thank you for letting me do that, Jay.
Well, thank you, Wes. Great reading. Something dawned on me as you were reading through there. You know, that passage there, Paul was addressing both the Jews and the Gentiles, right? The Jews being the natural olive branch, the Gentiles being the ones grafted in that weren't natural. And, you know, it says that he grafted in those unnatural branches to show his mercy. And it's interesting that he called the children of Israel and chose them as his people to show the nations his power and Godhead, right? And he brought them out of Egypt and showed them his supremacy over any and all things that would be called a god. And so he used Israel to demonstrate his power, and he uses the nations then to demonstrate his mercy, because Israel became disobedient just like the nations were. You know, so I just thought that was an interesting little twist in Romans there. So anyway, for what that's worth, if you will now stand one more time and open your hymnals to page 26. On page 26, we'll sing a hymn that comes from Psalm 33, titled, "Blessed is the Nation Yah is For," after which we'll start on our main topic, which is Damascus in prophecy. As we know, there's a lot going on in Syria these days, so I'll read a short blog post by an author, and then I'll have about a 45-minute audio interview with that same author, and then afterwards we'll read some scriptures, some prophetic scriptures about Damascus, because it is a point of contention these days as to whether these prophecies are past and have been fulfilled, or if they are yet to come. But first we'll sing page 26, "Blessed is the Nation Yah is For."
Faithful
Okay, if you all be seated. So the first thing I want to do is read through this short blog post. It's written by a gentleman by the name of Joel Rosenberg, and he's an author. He's actually a Christian. He lives in Israel now, from what I understand. But he has some interesting views, and I thought it would be interesting to talk about some of the things, because this whole issue of Syria, right, is becoming more and more a topic of concern. We have now, Russia involved and calling on the UN Security Council to convene a meeting to talk about the United States, Britain, and France sending missiles into Syria. And so there's, Damascus is in prophecy, and these are end-time prophecies. So, it's good for us to keep our eyes on what's going on there. And obviously we know that in the end times, the armies of the world will surround Jerusalem. So these are things that are important to the end time events and what's going on. So the title of his blog post is, "Does Bible Prophecy Foretell the Destruction of Damascus?" And I'm going to post a link here so you guys can refer to it and read it at your leisure, or follow along if you like. He starts out saying, "Earlier this year, a prominent member of Congress asked to meet with me in Washington, D.C. I thought the topic was going to be the possible coming war between Israel and Iran. Instead, the official asked, 'What are your thoughts on Isaiah 17?' For much of the next hour, therefore, we discussed the coming judgment of Damascus according to Bible prophecy, and how this scenario could possibly unfold in the coming years in relation to other Bible prophecies and current geopolitical trends in the Middle East." Here's a brief summary of what I said. There are actually two key biblical prophecies that explain that an unspecified time, or that at an unspecified time in the future, the city of Damascus will be completely destroyed, judged by God, and will not be inhabited again. Isaiah 17, 1 through 3, the oracle concerning Damascus. "Behold, Damascus is about to be removed from being a city and will become a fallen ruin. The cities of Aror are forsaken. They will be for flocks to lie down in, and there will be no one to frighten them. The fortified city will disappear from Ephraim, and sovereignty from Damascus." And then over in Jeremiah 49, verses 23 through 27, it says, "Concerning Damascus, Hamath and Arpad are put to shame, for they have heard bad news. They are disheartened. There is anxiety by the sea. It cannot be calmed. Damascus has become helpless. She has turned away to flee, and panic has gripped her. Distress and pangs have taken hold of her like a woman in childbirth. How the city of praise has not been deserted, the town of my joy. Therefore her young men will fall in her streets, and all the men of war will be silenced in that day, declares Yehovah Sabaoth, the Lord of hosts. I will set fire to the wall of Damascus, and it will devour the fortified towers of Ben-Hadad." These prophecies have not yet been fulfilled. Damascus is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities on earth. It has been attacked, besieged, and conquered, but Damascus has never been completely destroyed and left uninhabited. Yet, that is exactly what the Bible says will happen. The context of Isaiah 17 and Jeremiah 49 are a series of end-time prophecies dealing with God's judgments on Israel's neighbors and enemies leading up to and through the tribulation. How exactly will Damascus be destroyed? When will exactly it be destroyed? What will that look like? And what will be the implications for the rest of Syria, for Israel, and for the region? The honest answer is that the Bible doesn't say. And then he says he's currently writing a novel titled Damascus, The Damascus Countdown, that envisions how these prophecies could come to pass. This will be the third and last in the novel series that includes the 12th Imam and the Tehran Initiative. Now, we've talked about this 12th Imam, the Imam Mahdi. James wrote a study on that, and he talks about it in this audio that we're going to listen to in a bit. It's quite interesting. He said, Lord willing, I will finish the manuscript the first week of August. It's 90% complete. He says he's tracking the events in Damascus and Syria very closely, and he's got a couple of other blog posts there. He says he's praying that the Lord Jesus Christ have mercy on the people of that great city. The innocent blood shed by the Assad regime is reprehensible and heartbreaking and is setting the stage for a terrible judgment. Now, of course, we don't really know who's perpetrating what. Who knows what the United States and or the Western world are doing behind the scenes in some clandestine fashion? We don't know. But what we do know is there are clandestine activities that take place to effect regime change and that type of thing. And to deny that is just being somewhat short-sighted, in my opinion. So it'll be interesting to see how these things come about. And like I said, I agree with what he's saying in terms of Damascus. The Bible prophecy says it's going to be destroyed and it won't be inhabited. But this is, as he said, one of the oldest inhabited cities on the planet, continuously inhabited. So it doesn't appear that those prophecies have come to pass as of yet. And we know that, these prophecies are grouped in with these other end-time prophecies. So with that, I would like to now play the audio, which is an interview with Billy Hallowell, who is a senior editor for FaithWire. And he's interviewing Joel Rosenberg, who is, like I said, an author. And the title of the discussion or the interview is called "What's Israel's Future Under President Trump Look Like?" So they talk about many different things, but Damascus is a prominent part of the discussion. So I hope you enjoy it. So sit back and we'll have this audio, which is about 45 minutes.
Faithwire.com.
It's Billy Hallowell here, and I'm excited to have my friend Joel Rosenberg here in the studio. How you doing today, Joel?
I'm doing well, Billy. It's so nice to see you. It's so nice to be here in Manhattan. Actually, on American soil is a good thing, too. I'm really honored to be with you.
Well, yes, we have to talk about that because you've moved to Israel, which is amazing. How many years have you been there now?
It's coming up on 2.5 at this point. We got there in August of 2014 with thousands of rockets and missiles dropping on our heads as we arrived, but we really felt God wanted us to do this, and so we did it.
Well, I have to ask you all about that, but I have to first start with what everybody, I think, in this country and around the world is talking about, and that would be Donald Trump, President-elect Donald Trump.
Yeah.
What has the reaction been over in Israel to his electoral win?
Well, Israelis watched the election very, very closely because the impact on the U.S.-Israel relationship was going to be enormous. It has been so strained over the last 8 years between President Obama and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that the question was, can it get worse? Or, you almost thought of Trump saying, to the African-American community, what do you have to lose? But Israel has a lot to lose, right? We're a small country. We're feisty. We're strong. But we're a small country, and America's a superpower, and we live in a very dangerous neighborhood. There's genocide right over the border in Syria, in Iraq. Christians are being slaughtered. Muslims are being slaughtered. Iran's on the road to nuclear weapons.
It's chaos.
You
It's
can't take your
total
eye off the ball, right? So Israelis were watching the elections really carefully. But I would tell you that there's no question. Everyone woke up on that Wednesday in shock because the American media had made it clear. The New York Times said there was 90% probability that Hillary Clinton would be the next president. And so no matter how closely you're watching it, when a trusted brand like the New York Times, among others, says, look, this is a done deal. You could call it close in a few states, that's fine, but it's a 90% done deal. You wake up the next morning like, oh. So not only did every Israeli citizen, but honestly, the government as well had to process, all right, Clinton, we knew from 30 years of her being, with her husband, being Secretary of State, being a senator. And the polls were indicating that Israelis felt that Clinton would be tougher on Israel than Trump in terms of pushing us on the peace process. But most Israelis said, but we know her, so I think we'll be okay. Bill Clinton was good to us, even though he had other issues. But but Trump was more of a wild card.
Yeah.
Maybe emphasis on the wild. Okay. But there's a new poll out. I just did a blog on this the other day. 83% of Israelis now say they see Donald Trump as pro-Israel. So I would say Israelis are increasingly cautiously optimistic. They're cautious. We're Jews. We've had a tough track record of dealing with leaders over the years, but there is a sense that this guy maybe really is pro-Israel. We can go into the reasons, but I mean, there are some reasons, despite a lot of attacks against him as being anti-Semitic, anti-Israel,
which is
his daughter's Jewish, converted to Judaism. I mean, his son-in-law is Orthodox Jewish. But he appointed Mike Pence as one of the most solid evangelical pro-Israel leaders in the United States. Mike and Karen and I and my wife, we're friends. We know them really well. We've spent time with them in Israel when he brought a trade delegation over two years ago this Christmas. So we know, and Israelis know, this is a guy you can trust. And bring in General James Mattis into the defense secretary position. This is a guy who was the head of CENTCOM, right? He understands the threat from Iran, from the Islamic State. He was the head of NATO. So you got a solid 4-star general who, Trump doesn't have any national security, foreign policy experience, but Mattis does, Pence does.
The people around him.
And he's starting to build a team, which, there are issues for here and there. They're controversial here and there. But generally, you're watching him build a team that would know how to defend American interests and work more closely with an ally like Israel than we have seen over the last 8 years.
So maybe people are a little more at ease now that they've had a chance to think about it.
Yeah, I would look. Yes, I would put the emphasis still for most Israelis on the cautiously optimistic. But here's one simple example, right? Like Israelis haven't looked at every policy position, every white paper that the Trump team put out. And of course, he changes on a lot of things. So, but one thing has been consistent. He has talked about radical Islam, and has taunted both Hillary and Barack Obama. You won't even say it. You won't acknowledge it. You don't look at their ideology. That has cut through. People see that he's talking about this. Now, I would argue he's got to dial some of that back. We have Sunni Muslim Arab allies like Jordan, like Egypt, like the Gulf states, the Saudis, and others who we need. Like we can't just
alienate them.
We don't want all Muslims to think that we think they're all radicals. And so the president's going to need to learn some nuance. That's not his strong suit. So we'll have to see. But cautiously optimistic. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu described, I was at a conference just before Thanksgiving, right before I flew back here to the States. The Jerusalem Post sponsored what was called a diplomatic conference. 400 foreign ambassadors to Israel, defense attaches, so forth. Somehow they invited me. I'm ambassador for Christ, but I'm not actually a diplomat. But anyways, interesting. Netanyahu was the keynote, and most of the defense minister and all the opposition leaders, all the top cabinet members spoke, briefing these diplomats. And Netanyahu gave the keynote, and he described himself as, quote, supremely optimistic, unquote, about Israel's future. Now, he actually never mentioned the word Trump. He didn't mention the elections. He was focusing on all kinds of dynamics in which Israel's economy, military, and place in the world is improving. Now, he actually noted in the speech, it was interesting to sit there and just hear it from him directly. He says, I know you in the press are going to say, oh, Mr. Gloomy, always thinks that everything's so bad. Well, and you think about it, he's been talking about Iran, the nuclear weapon, genocide of ISIS, the region is on fire.
Which it is.
It is. All that's true. And Netanyahu does have a reputation for being like, I wouldn't say alarmist. I think these alarm bells are going off. It's true. But like he's looking at the glass half empty.
It's a doom and gloom report.
Yeah, well, it's a very Jewish thing. We are not glass half full people. We're, the glass is half empty. There's a crack in it. It'll be gone by tomorrow, maybe by today, right? I mean, and we have reasons for that historically.
So maybe there was some optimism there based on what.
So he never mentioned Trump, but by saying he was supremely optimistic and talking about some of the dynamics, all of the specifics he gave were true. But I read that as he feels now that he has a friend, a personal friend, as well as an ally at one end of Pennsylvania Avenue in the White House, and Pence even as strong or stronger, and now with Republicans in control in the House and the Senate, you also have friends and allies in Congress. For the last 8 years, Netanyahu has operated in an environment where Congress, on a bipartisan basis, was very pro-Israel. But Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and John Kerry have been not anti-Israel, but it's been a very strange relationship. Hillary herself once described herself famously as the screamer in chief or the yeller in chief against Netanyahu, constantly berating him for his policies. Well, that doesn't make us an ally in a dangerous region facing genocide and nuclear weapons. Think, oh, good, they really got my back. When they say that, I trust them.
Well, you had the Bernie Sanders effect, too, of him trying to insert some of that lane, trying to move the platform in a different direction. Oh, absolutely.
Too. The Democratic Party that'll be a piece I write soon, but it's worth mentioning with you, Billy, is the Democratic Party is splitting on Israel. All the numbers are going down in terms of the base of the party or the broad swath of the party being supportive of Israel. Most members of Congress, House and Senate, in the Democratic Party are still in a different generation where being pro-Israel is important. And you have Jewish donors, but the base is breaking hard and fast away from Israel, which is why Bernie Sanders, the first major Jewish candidate for a nomination, didn't go to the AIPAC pro-Israel conference. He hired people who are highly critical of Israel, I would say anti-Israel. In fact, he even had to fire his main Jewish outreach person was anti-Israel. He had to fire her eventually. But he was taking very pro-Palestinian positions. Now, I'm pro-Palestinian in the sense that I want them to have human rights, civil rights. But what I'm saying is Bernie Sanders was taking a pretty aggressive I'm not a big rah-rah, I love Israel. I'm taking a very different position. And the polling suggests the Democratic Party wants to turn away from the pro-Israel position, meaning a strong Israel has the right to defend herself, we help arm her, we work closely. No, that's changing in the Democratic Party, and that was starting to have an effect on Hillary. Last point I'll make on that is some of the WikiLeaks indicated that senior aides to Hillary were telling her, don't talk about Israel unless you're in a room of just pro-Israel donors. Otherwise, don't bring it up. Why? Because you're in a primary fight, and the base is not
It's
a friend
changing.
of Israel.
Yeah, it's changing.
So Netanyahu has to navigate that. He needs. I think that's why he did the deal, the 10-year defense deal, $38 billion with Obama. Could he have gotten a better deal from Trump? Probably. But he needed a Democrat president to sign off on pro-Israel money because that's my personal assessment of it. It's a strategic problem for Israel if Democrats bolt and break away from Israel. Israel does not want Israel to be a partisan issue in Washington or in America. We want this to be hey, we all agree Israel's our friend, Israel's our ally, we stand together. That's what we want. And I see tremors coming.
When we talk about the Middle East and all the things that are going on there, all the chaos that's going on in the Middle East, what are some of the things, or maybe one of the things that concerns you right now the most that you're observing?
The concern me the most about, again,
the state of the Middle East.
The state of the Middle East, right? I just want to make sure. How much time did you say we had on the podcast?
The loaded question of all loaded questions.
Right. Well, there's no question that Iran is the longer-term existential threat to Israel and our Arab allies. Iran is Shia Muslim, not Sunni. It's Persian and not Arab. And it's led by leaders who believe a very minority position on eschatology, Islamic eschatology. They are trying to bring about the end of days. They believe that the Messiah, the Mahdi, is coming at any moment, and that their job is to set into motion the conditions of chaos and carnage into which this so-called Messiah will one day come, set up his kingdom or caliphate, and rule the world. Okay.
Where do they derive that from?
Well, some of it's from the Quran, but most of it comes from what's called the Hadith, which would be the extra writings. In Christendom, it's sort of the Apocrypha. In Judaism, it's sort of the Talmud. It's the Mishnah. That's the other writings that are that Muslims, in this case, consider sacred, but they're not in the Quran. But then they have sort of even within that, there's a minority, I would say, cultic position that not only will the Messiah come, meaning the Mahdi, every Muslim believes that. Yes, Jesus comes as the deputy. Every Muslim believes that. Yes, he will set up the kingdom or the caliphate that will run the world. Every Muslim believes that. What the leaders of Iran at the top believe is that you can accelerate it, that you as a human can hasten the coming of the promised one, of the Messiah. They call him the 12th Imam. And how do you do it? By creating conditions of chaos, carnage, and even genocide. Now, the Iranian approach is to have a long-term view. We're going to build a nuclear industry that can lead us to actual nuclear warheads. We're going to build long-range and even intercontinental ballistic missiles. And when we're ready, when the Messiah tells us, we will launch a global thermonuclear holy war. Now, the leaders of ISIS, the Islamic State, they're Sunnis, whereas so they have it's a similar theology, eschatology, but they have a little bit different take. Without getting into all the nuances, they also agree that you can accelerate the end of days and the coming of the Messiah, but they don't take the Iranian position that you have to wait till you build nuclear weapons. Oh, no. If you have a sword and an AK-47, you can commit genocide today. You don't have to wait for nuclear weapons. And that's what ISIS is doing. They're trying to create the conditions that they think are prophetic: chaos, carnage, genocide, hoping to sort of force the hand or trigger the arrival of the Mahdi to set up his global kingdom. They don't want to wait. So those are strategic and tactical differences between the leaders of Iran and the leaders of ISIS. But let's put it this way, Billy, that a new president of the United States is going to have to face two forces that we've never seen in history. We've never had one, much less two, nation states on the planet in all of human history whose leaders were trying to bring about the end of the world as we've known it.
bizarre.
Never happened ever.
One of the things that
So those are the biggest threats.
One of the things that you've talked about too related to this is the difference between radical Islam and apocalyptic Islam. And
Right.
so I'd love for you to unpack that a little bit because I think it's really interesting. We tend to think of it all in one bucket, and obviously there are some similarities, but can you differentiate the two?
Sure. Radical Islam, and this, President-elect Trump gets credit. He's willing to say it. Radical Islam. Now, yeah, I want him to put some nuance. This is part of the nuance. Okay, so Islam is 1.6 billion people, right? So, but I've done a lot of study of this, very detailed analysis, and based on polling and social science, it's fair to say that 90 plus percent of Muslims do not have a radical, violent outlook. Yeah, they believe in the end of days. Yes, they believe the Messiah is coming. Yes, they wish the whole world was Muslim, but they're not willing to put on a suicide bombing vest to get it. They don't support killing, murder, and they certainly don't support genocide. So that's about 90% of Islam. That's good. Okay, theologically, as a Jewish believer in Jesus, I disagree with Islam theologically. But in terms of being happy that 90% of Muslims don't want to kill me or any of us, that's
Great.
good. Let's just take a positive where we have it. Okay. Now, the social science, the polling data indicates that between 7 and 10% of Muslims around the world do believe that you should use violence to accomplish political ends. It doesn't mean that all 7 to 10% would, take up arms or launch jihad or, blow up themselves or their children, but it means that they support it.
They're sympathetic
They
to
would
it, at
encourage.
least.
More so, they support it. They encourage it. Now, what's the political end? Radical Islam is the movement that says we will use force, we will use violence to drive the infidels, mainly Judeo-Christian society, out of the regions that we call holy lands and holy places, out of Saudi Arabia, where Mecca and Medina are, out of Israel, where Jerusalem is, out of the Middle East, out of North Africa. This is ours. It's not yours. Radical. Those who don't believe the way we believe, the infidels should leave, and we'll use violence to persuade you to leave. That's radical Islam. Very dangerous. That's Al Qaeda. That's Hamas. That's the Muslim Brotherhood. That's the Taliban. Dangerous forces, right? Okay. Now, a subset of radical Islam says we're not just trying to use violence to drive infidels out of our region. We're going to use violence to eradicate infidels, because in a world where the Messiah is coming and he will set up a global Islamic kingdom known as a caliphate, there is no place for infidels. So you make your choice. You can convert, or we're going to liquidate you. That is, so that's the leadership of Iran. Explicitly, I've got on my blog, on my website, I've got fact sheets that we've developed where it's just their quotes, what they say, the leaders of Iran, what do they say they want? And the leaders of the Islamic State, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, he has a doctorate in Islamic, theology. This guy knows Islam, and he's saying, from his interpretation, it's not my place to say whether it's right or not. I'm saying what he believes. He believes the end of days has come, and his job is to slaughter people until the Messiah comes and finishes the job. So when you talk about radical Islam, it's important to say that's only, and I'm going to put that in quotes, 7 to 10% of 1.6 billion. But 10% of 1.6 billion is 160 million people. That's half the population of the United States. That's more than the population of Russia. That would be the 9th largest country on the planet if you put all the radicals in the Islamic Republic of Radicalistan.
Well, wouldn't it almost be better to have them there rather than spread out?
It probably would, but it's not the case.
Right.
So it's important for our leaders, the president-elect and the new administration, to begin to educate the American people, certainly in the world, but certainly Americans. Listen, our problem as a nation, as a government, is not with Islam. Our problem is with radical Muslims, those who will take violence to try to, drive us out of what they think is theirs, and apocalyptic Islam, which is Iran and ISIS. Explaining that is important because if you paint with broad brushes, you're not only being unfair to well-meaning, good people, Muslims who we would disagree with theologically, but we would be happy to be their neighbor and their friend and their ally. And you could actually end up radicalizing people who wouldn't otherwise be radicalized by creating fear. I'll give you one example. Okay, so I'm Jewish on my father's side, right? I'm Gentile on my mom's side. I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. I believe Jesus is the Messiah. So in America, I'm called an evangelical. Maybe in Israel, I'm called a Messianic Jew. Okay. I'm a Zionist. I believe God gave the land of Israel to Israel. I believe in full human rights, civil rights for the Palestinians, but I do believe God is doing something there that's prophetic. I worked briefly, 16 years ago, for Prime Minister Netanyahu on his comeback campaign team. Okay, Billy, it's true. He didn't come back for 9 more years, so I had no impact. But my point is, that's a little bit of my background. Now, I write these novels, and this current series is the third target, the first hostage, and now the next one that comes out in March is called Without Warning. It's my latest series of political thrillers. Now, this series of thrillers is about what if the Islamic State captured chemical weapons in Syria and then was planning a series of genocidal attacks against the United States, Israel, and some of our Sunni Arab allies like Jordan. So in the first 2 novels that are already out, The Third Target and The First Hostage, King Abdullah of Jordan is an actual character. Okay? Now, because I couldn't think of a way to fictionalize him, Jordan was going to be part of the story. I could make a fake king, but it was hard to fictionalize King Abdullah. Why? Because he's a descendant of Muhammad, direct descendant. He is a moderate. He has a peace treaty with Israel. He loves the United States. He's fighting ISIS theologically, politically, economically, and militarily. I mean, he's like the dream ally. King Abdullah II of Jordan is the most faithful Sunni Arab ally that the West has. And if we didn't have him, we'd have to make him up. Like, that's the guy you want. He used to be the head of special forces for Jordan. The guy knows how to fight, and he's training his people to fight ISIS. Okay, so I didn't know how to fictionalize him, so I made him a character. Well, if you're Jewish, and you're an evangelical, and you're a Zionist, and you're a dual U.S.-Israeli citizen, and you write a novel about ISIS trying to overthrow Jordan, as well as several other types of attacks, and you make the king of Jordan a character, you could get banned from the kingdom, right? You can never come back. We're offended by what you're saying. Instead, it turned out that the king read my most recent novel in January.
Oh, wow.
And then, rather than banning me from the kingdom, invited my wife and me to come and visit him for 5 days.
And you went?
I went. We went. And we had lunch with the king. He took us to a military exercise where they were training how to fight ISIS. He sent us to military bases. We met with his generals. I spent 5 days with the king of Jordan, including a 2.5-hour final dinner. Just him, me, my wife had to go back to Israel because of a previous engagement with our kids. But all that to say, 2.5 hours alone with the king and some of his closest friends, having dinner at his personal palace as a Jew, evangelical, Zionist, Israeli. Like, that's
kind
not
of incredible.
That's not normal. Now, what that tells me is several things. First of all, it was just a wonderful, amazing blessing of God to build a friendship with a guy who really is fighting against the enemy. But it also tells me this novel series is entirely about the difference between Islam, radical Islam, and apocalyptic Islam. But rather than write an op-ed about it, I decided I'm going to take people on a high-speed, high-octane thriller. I'm going to keep them up all night till they're cursing me on Twitter at 5 in the morning saying, I've been up all night. I got to get up an hour for work, and you're just killing me. I can't put this book down. That's what I want.
Have you sent it to Trump? You got to send this to Trump.
I do, well, Pence is a friend, and he's read all my books. So maybe at some point we'll have a chance to give a copy of the series to the president. But what I mean is, here's a king who saw, I think, and I don't want to overstate it, but a friend in me, like, and I'm just one person, but I mean, you can talk about these issues, and I have very strong feelings about them. But when you talk in terms of nuance, when you talk about there are differences. Here, the King of Jordan is a Muslim, so I disagree with him theologically, but he's a friend, and he's the type of person we want as Americans. Right. That's the guy.
Well, and this was the concern with
May
Trump.
Your tribe increase.
This was the concern with Trump that a lot of people had, was
Exactly.
that the language, the ban, the proposed ban, all those things were things that would alienate people like
Exactly.
the king.
And that's why going from Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, who won't acknowledge that there's a subset within Islam, a theology, an ideology, and an eschatology within a subset of Islam that's incredibly dangerous, even genocidal. They won't talk about it. Trump, to his credit, is talking about it, but I think he's going over.
The pendulum swing. To the
Well,
other
yeah,
side.
you've won. Now you've got to dial this thing more wisely, because you're risking inflaming people who can be your allies and ought to be.
Yeah. Well, one thing I want to ask you, and this is shifting gears quite a bit.
Sure,
it's another loaded question, but we were talking about it before.
I'm glad
we
you're asking
started
the easy
recording.
questions. Radical Islam, apocalyptic Islam.
This one is tough, but I feel like you'll have some ideas on it. We were speaking a little bit earlier before we started recording about millennials and this issue of prophecy, which you and I have talked a lot about over the years.
And congratulations on the book. I mean, I think you begin to lay out the different views of biblical eschatology. I don't think you didn't really touch on Islamic eschatology, but because take one thing at a time. But I think it was a very useful project, and congratulations.
Well, I appreciate your help. I mean, you were one of the key figures that I was able to interview.
Enjoyed talking about it with you.
Well, and one of the things after working on that, and we talked about it today, was this notion of millennials and where they stand on the Bible, the disconnect that we know exists.
Right.
The largest share of millennials, it's the one generation that has the biggest disconnect from the Bible and Christianity. A lot of confusion, maybe not hostility towards it, but just not knowing a lot about the Bible. And so when you talk about prophecy, which I think is the area of the Bible that is extremely important, but one that even a lot of older Americans don't know a lot about and want to stay away from because they're unsure, how do you reach that generation with a message that feels, because I think a lot of times the way it's delivered isn't always relatable for millennials?
Right. No, it's right.
So
well, I think it's the number one reason that so much of the American church has shied away from even talking about prophecy. I mean, think about it. Let's set this in context. 27% of the Bible is prophecy. 27%. So apparently God thinks that 1 out of every 4 things he says to us is important in the sense that it begins to tell us about the future. So if you imagine, so I've got 4 sons. Imagine if I taught my kids to drive, but taught them 27% less of what they really needed to know to be safe on the roads. It'd be a dereliction of duty, right? Let's say you're running a medical school and you taught your medical students 27% less of what they needed to save lives. It'd be insane. God has given us the word from Genesis to Revelation. It's all important. Now, the problem is, one of the problems is that there are some pastors and theologians that just don't believe it. So we're not going to deal with it. But there are others who believe it and they just sound nutty. I mean, I'm sorry. There's no
problem. Yeah,
you go to these websites and they're like, oh my gosh, there's there's like every sentence is in capital letters and there's 42 exclamation points.
Well, there's Harold Camping. I mean, you have the whole Harold Camping thing.
Right. You got the hyper sensationalism where they're making crazy predictions of their own that don't come true. They're never going to come true. And they sound a little like they're from Area 51. And it's like, hey, have some decaf. Settle down. So when prophecy is taught badly, either from a perspective of disbelief or crazy, sensationalistic, just nuttiness, it turns people off. But we don't stop teaching truth because people teach it badly or wrongly, right? People don't say, well, I'm not preaching the gospel anymore because, there's the prosperity gospel guys and there's the nuts. And no, you say, oh, we better preach it more clearly and more carefully and more wisely, but more passionately, because this is important. So 1 out of 4 verses in the entire Bible tells us about things that we need to know about the future. 1,000 of those, out of the 1,000 prophecies, half have come true. And a big chunk of those is about the Messiah, the
Right.
Lord Jesus Christ. So we think prophecy is important, those of us who are evangelicals. But there are more prophecies about the second coming of the Messiah than there were about the first. So where does that leave us? I think you reverse the dynamic. I think rather than avoiding it, you talk about it, but everybody is anxious about the future. And in some ways, as darkness falls on our world, we're even more anxious about the future. It's how you talk about it, right? In John 12:49, the Lord Jesus Christ says to his disciples something very interesting. He says, and this is the NIV translation, but the Father commands me what to say and how to say it. We need to be teaching truth, the whole counsel of Scripture. That includes prophecy. But it's also how we say it. It's the tone, right? We have to have a little bit of caution in the way we teach it. In other words, okay, well, and so I think that millennials are very anxious about their future, and want to know what God has to say about their future, their nation's future, the world's future, and how they should interact. Why is there so much injustice? Is God ever going to bring justice? How do we live in a fallen, crazy world? Prophecy is about that. So, but it's how you teach it. And I have a personal passion to, sort of help people rediscover the purpose and the power of sane, thoughtful, biblical prophecy, because it matters to us.
Yeah, well, I was talking to an atheist friend the other day, and she's maybe more agnostic now, and she was asking me, she came to me and started asking me, what about my friend was saying all these things about the end times, and we were talking about Ezekiel, and she read 36 to 39. I said, just read this, and then let's talk about Israel, and after, she was like, at the least, this is very strange. So when you start to look at the facts, you kind of walk away, okay, well, if I don't believe in anything, after I read this and I look at Israel, 1948, and I look at where we are, I at least have to conclude that it's very bizarre that somebody 2,500 years ago would be writing something like this.
Preach it.
In light
Absolutely.
of where we are.
Well, here's the thing. So when I teach prophecy, one of the things I find myself, one of my principles is to not try to teach it to persuade people that these things are going to happen, but rather lay it out there. This is what the Scriptures say. Now, there are skeptics. There are people who have different interpretations. One of the things you did in your book was say, okay, here's what Tim LaHaye says, here's what Joel Rosenberg says, here's what Hank Hanegraaff says. There are differences. It's okay. We can be grown-ups. We can have a sane, civil conversation about different views.
Yeah, you weren't angry at all. Some people were. You were not angry in those.
Why should we be angry about these things? I mean, so, but the point then is, let's teach what the Word says. You can even teach a range of views about it. And let the Holy Spirit take that and drive that deeper in our hearts. If you try to persuade someone that Russia and Iran are going to build an alliance and try to attack Israel, today that might not be so hard to persuade, because trend lines are moving rapidly. But 50 years ago, not 50 years ago, 1992, I first met Tim LaHaye. My wife was working for Beverly LaHaye, and my wife was running their national conventions. They're women conventions, just Concerned Women for America. So we'd move into a hotel for 3-4 days for this convention, but it was thousands of conservative women. Now, if I had been single, that would have seemed wonderful. I was married. I didn't really care that there were thousands of women meeting. I was just glad my wife had a job and we had a hotel room, and so we're all good. But Tim LaHaye would come because his wife ran the organization. We'd sit around and we'd talk prophecy. That's when I first met him, and it was fascinating. Every year, same time of the year, we'd have these conversations. Well, he started to try to teach me about the war of Gog and Magog, this Russian-Iranian alliance with Turkey and Libya and all these countries from Ezekiel 38 and 39, as you've just described. And I have to tell you, Billy, I was like, You've got to be kidding me. I mean, Dr. LaHaye, I know you're the world famous expert on Bible prophecy, but you are not telling me that Russia is going to be a threat to the Jewish people, to Israel in the future. I mean, are you insane? Now, some of these things I thought and didn't say. I asked him a lot of questions, but I was young enough, brash enough, but not a complete idiot. I didn't say some of these things, but this is what I thought. I'm being honest. Like the Soviet Union is imploding before our very eyes. 1 million Jews are pouring out of Israel, out of the Soviet Union, and coming to Israel. The Russian bear has been declawed. Like, the equipment is in ruins. The army is in tatters. For you to sit there as arguably the world's leading expert on Bible prophecy and try to convince me that the Russians are going to attack Israel one day, I mean, it's insane. I don't believe it. I'm not going to believe it. And I was his friend, right? I'm not an atheist.
Right. And you weren't one of his critics.
Right. So what happens? Today, everything has changed. He wasn't trying to persuade me. He thought, this is important for you to know. You just watch and see what happens, young man. And we've seen that. So I think it's important that we not try to overreach. Let millennials hear what God is saying. You don't have to force them to make a therefore yet, or even and so one of the things I do, so I think one of the things that God has been gracious to me is he didn't send me to seminary. Now, I'm all for people studying the ancient languages and getting their theology right. I'm big on that. I literally coming to you from meetings at Dallas Seminary and Southwestern Baptist. So I believe in the seminaries. But God didn't, for whatever reason, he didn't send me there. Where did he send me? He sent me to Washington to work for Bill Bennett, Jack Kemp, Rush Limbaugh, Bibi Netanyahu. Why? Well, I failed in all those jobs. I mean, it didn't help them advance politically at all. But I learned to say, okay, Bible prophecy in the ear of a skeptic media, skeptic political class, it just sounds nutty. So rather than try to persuade a senator, a congressman, a future president, hey, this is what's going to happen. You got a plan. No, you just teach it. You just share it. And novels are a good way to help people even think about, wow, whoa, how I never heard about that, never thought about that. That's okay, because what LaHaye did with me is he planted the seed of the Word of God in my heart, 1992. 10 years later, 15 years later, 20 years later, what he said is making a lot more sense to me. But he didn't need me to take action on it in 1992. He just wanted to teach me something. And I think that for me, that's a reasonable approach. And then, of course, you have to avoid the temptation that a lot of prophecy teachers have is of acting like you know more than you do. Like, you can't make leaps and say, well, Putin is Gog. Right? We don't know that Putin is the Gog figure in Ezekiel 38. Now, he's Gog-esque, right? I mean, he could turn out to be Gog, but we don't know that. So why plant a flag on something? Right. That comes from pride. It comes from hubris. It comes from people trying to say, they're basically guessing.
And they've been laughed at throughout history.
It's sort of like being a political pundit and say, Hillary Clinton has a 90% chance of winning. Okay, you look like an idiot on the day after. If you said, I think she's got a better than 50-50 chance, the odds are in her favor, but we'll see. Well, then you sound like a normal, rational person. So we teach what God says from his word in prophecy, and then we say, look, I can't tell you exactly how or when it will play out, but it will. And the question we have to say is, do we believe that God is trying to warn us of some things in advance? And then if he is, then we ask, how do I respond? Right? Okay, maybe the tribulation is 100 years away, but Christians in Syria are going through genocide right now. So rather than getting in an argument with my friends over, is there a tribulation? How long does it last? Those are important issues. But what about how to feed and care for and minister to people who are dying in their own tribulation, lowercase t, right this minute? This is where the gospel tells us how we're supposed to live with trauma today, even while we know things are going to get worse in the future. But to get in big theological, eschatological arguments over things and not show love and compassion to our neighbors and our neighbors and our enemies even, that's anti-biblical. It's unbiblical.
Well, listen, I love this. This has been great, and I always appreciate getting to sit down with you. We're going to have you back again. The book comes out in March without warning.
Without
March,
warning,
right?
yes. It's the third and the end in this trilogy, and let's just say the bad news is ISIS comes to America.
Ugh.
Let's pray it doesn't happen.
Let's pray that does not come to. Well, you have a track record of predicting things, so let's hope it doesn't happen.
Yeah, I'm just trying to write a worst case scenario, God forbid, type novel.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much for coming down today.
Great to be with you, Billy. Thank you.
Faithwire.com.
Okay, well, hopefully you found that at least thought-provoking. He did cover, a lot of different ground there, but the things he talked about are quite interesting, and I like what he said about approaching prophecy from an anecdotal viewpoint, where you basically share with them what the scriptures say, and then it's in their mind, right? And I use that with my children all the time. I know they're not listening to me. And I know that 9 times out of 10, they think, especially my older ones, they think I'm just, I've been saying these things for so long and nothing has happened, so they don't believe. But I tell them every day, well, not every day, but when we talk about these things, I tell them, well, you just keep this conversation in the back of your mind, and one day, something will happen, and you will remember that conversation, and that's my hope. So what I'd like to do is just read through some of the scriptures that were mentioned in the blog post and in the audio, and we'll start with Isaiah 17. And Damascus is mentioned, in verses 1 through 3, but the other verses are interesting as well. Starting in verse 1 of chapter 17 of the book of Isaiah, it says, "An oracle concerning Damascus. Behold, Damascus will cease to be a city and will become a heap of ruins." Now, as we've already discussed, that hasn't happened in known history. So it's apparently a future event. The cities of Eror are deserted. They will be for flocks, which will lie down, and none will make them afraid. The fortress will disappear from Ephraim. Ephraim is, in prophecy, the British Commonwealth, from which Manasseh came, which represents the United States, as I understand it. It says, "The fortress will disappear from Ephraim, and the kingdom from Damascus, and the remnant of Syria will be like the glory of the children of Israel, declares Yehovah of hosts," or Yehovah Sabaoth. "And in that day, the glory of Jacob will be brought low, and the fat of his flesh will grow lean." Now, Ephraim and Manasseh were obviously children of Jacob, but so were Reuben and Simeon and all of the others, Judah. So the Israelite nations, this is a prophecy against those nations. It says, the glory of Jacob will be brought low. And who has enjoyed more glory than the Western world that are part of the Israelite nations? And I can't list them all off the top of my head, but France, Denmark, Holland, the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, they're all part of the nation of Israel. They are descendants of Jacob. He says, the fat of his flesh will grow lean, and it shall be as when the reaper gathers standing grain, and his arm harvests the ears, and as when one gleans the ears of grain in the valley of Rephaim. Gleanings will be left in it, as when an olive tree is beaten, 2 or 3 berries in the top of the highest bough, 4 or 5 on the branches of a fruit tree, declares Yehovah Elohim of Israel. Right? A remnant will be left. He will not look to the altars, the work of his hands, and he will not look on what his own fingers have made, either the Asherim or the altars of incense. In that day their strong cities will be like the deserted places of the wooded heights and the hilltops, which they deserted because of the children of Israel, and there will be desolation. For you have forgotten the Elohim of your salvation, and have not remembered the rock of your refuge. Therefore, though you plant pleasant plants and sow the vine branch of a stranger, though you make them grow on the day that you plant them, and make them blossom in the morning that you sow, yet the harvest will flee away in the day of grief and incurable pain. Ah, the thunder of many peoples, they thunder like the thundering of the sea. Ah, the roar of nations, they roar like the roaring of mighty waters. The nations roar like the roaring of many waters, but he will rebuke them, and they will flee far away. Chased like chaff on the mountains before the wind, and whirling dust before the storm. At evening time, behold terror. Before morning there are no more. This is the portion of those who loot us, and the lot of those who plunder us. And then moving over to Jeremiah, if you go to Jeremiah chapter 49, I'll just read, I have a few scriptures that I want to cover, and then we will close the formal service. But I thought these were interesting and pertinent to the discussion. Starting in verse 1 of Jeremiah 49, it says, Concerning the Ammonites, thus says Yehovah, has Israel no sons? Has he no heir? Why then has Milcom dispossessed Gad, and his people settled in its cities? Therefore, behold, the days are coming, declares Yehovah, when I will cause the battle cry to be heard against Rabbah of the Ammonites. It shall become a desolate mound, and its villages shall be burned with fire. Then Israel shall dispossess those who dispossessed him, says Yehovah. Wail, O Heshbon, for Ai is laid waste. Cry out, O daughters of Rabbah. Put on sackcloth, lament, and run to and fro among the hedges. For Milcom shall go into exile, while his priests and with his priests and his officials. Why do you boast of your valleys, O faithless daughter, who trusted in her treasures, saying, Who will come against me? Behold, I will bring terror upon you, declares Adonai Yehovah of hosts, from all who are around you, and you shall be driven out, every man straight before him, with none to gather the fugitives. But afterward I will restore the fortunes of the Ammonites, declares Yehovah. Concerning Edom, thus says Yehovah of hosts, Is wisdom no more in Teman? Has counsel perished from the prudent? Has their wisdom vanished? Flee, turn back, dwell in the depths, O inhabitants of Dedan, for I will bring the calamity of Esau upon him, the time when I punish him. If grape gatherers came to you, would they not leave gleanings? If thieves came by night, would they not destroy only enough for themselves? But I have stripped Esau bare. I have uncovered his hiding places, and he is not able to conceal himself. His children are destroyed, and his brothers and his neighbors, and he is no more. Leave your fatherless children. I will keep them alive, and let your widows trust in me. For thus says Yehovah, if those who did not deserve to drink the cup must drink it, will you go unpunished? You shall not go unpunished, but you must drink. For I have sworn by myself, declares Jehovah, that Bozrah shall become a horror, a taunt, a waste, and a curse, and all her cities shall be perpetual wastes. When God has his fill and executes judgment, it is severe. These are severe punishments for disobedience and dishonor of his name. He says, for I have sworn by myself, declares Jehovah, that Bozrah shall become a horror, a taunt, a waste, and a curse, and all her cities shall be perpetual wastes. I have heard the message from Jehovah, and an envoy has been sent among the nations. Gather yourselves together and come against her, and rise up for battle. For behold, I will make you small among the nations, despised among mankind. The horror you inspire has deceived you, and the pride of your heart, you who live in the clefts of the rock, who told the height of the hill. Though you make your nest as high as the eagles, I will bring you down from there, declares Jehovah. God will bring the haughty low, and he will bring the mighty to their knees. Edom shall become a horror. Everyone who passes by it will be horrified and will hiss because of all its disasters. As when Sodom and Gomorrah and their neighboring cities were overthrown, says Jehovah, no man shall dwell there. Excuse me. No man shall sojourn there, or sojourn in her. Behold, like a lion coming up from the jungle of the Jordan against a perennial pasture, I will suddenly make him run away from her, and I will appoint over her whomever I choose. For who is like me? Who will summon me? What shepherd can stand before me? Therefore, hear the plan that Jehovah has made against Edom, and the purposes that he has formed against the inhabitants of Teman. Even the little ones of the flock shall be dragged away. Surely their fold shall be appalled at their fate. At the sound of their fall, the earth shall tremble. The sound of their cry shall be heard at the Red Sea. Behold, one shall mount up and fly swiftly like an eagle, and spread its wings against Bozrah. And the heart of the warriors of Edom shall be in that day like the heart of a woman in her birth pain. Verse 23, talking about Damascus. Concerning Damascus, Hamath and Arpad are confounded, for they have heard bad news. They melt in fear. They are troubled like the sea that cannot be quiet. Damascus has become feeble. She turned to flee, and panic seized her. Anguish and sorrows have taken hold of her, as of a woman in labor. How is the famous city not forsaken, the city of my joy? Therefore her young men shall fall in her squares, and all her soldiers shall be destroyed in that day, declared Jehovah Sabaoth. And it will kindle a fire in the wall of Damascus, or I will kindle a fire in the wall of Damascus, and it shall devour the strongholds of Ben-Hadad. And it goes on with more judgment. Kedar, concerning Kedar and his kingdoms of Hazor, that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, struck down. Thus says Jehovah, rise up against Kedar, destroy the people of the east. Their tents and their flocks shall be taken, their curtains and all their goods. Their camels shall be led away from them, and men shall cry to them, terror on every side. Flee, wander far away, dwell in the depths, O inhabitants of Hazor, declares Jehovah. For Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, has made a plan against you and formed a purpose against you. Rise up, advance against a nation at ease that dwells securely, declares Jehovah, that has no gates or bars, that dwells alone. Their camels shall become plunder, their herds and livestock as spoil. I will scatter to every wind those who cut the corners of their hair, and will bring their calamity from every side of them, declares Jehovah. Hazor shall become a haunt of jackals, an everlasting waste. No man shall dwell there, no man shall sojourn in her. These are prophecies against nations that refuse to obey God. And this nation, the nations of Israel, the children of Jacob, will suffer the same consequences. The word of Yehovah that came to Jeremiah the prophet concerning Elam in the beginning of the reign of Zedekiah, king of Judah. Thus says Yehovah of hosts, behold, I will break the bow of Elam, the mainstay of their might, right? He breaks their military power. And I will bring upon Elam the four winds, the four quarters of heaven, and I will scatter them all to all those winds, and there will be no nation to which those driven out of Elam shall not come. Just like the children of Israel, the 10 tribes were taken into captivity and never returned. I will terrify Elam before their enemies and before those who seek their life. I will bring disaster upon them. My fierce anger, declares Yehovah. I will send the sword after them until I have consumed them. And I will set my throne in Elam and destroy their king and officials, declares Yehovah. But in the latter days, I will restore the fortunes of Elam, declares Yehovah. Right? So some nations are going to be brought low and others will be brought up. And then I'll read Ezekiel 38 and 39, and then we'll call it a day. And I would suggest you read through Zechariah chapters 9 through 14. I think those are important end-time prophecies. And it's important for us to understand who these nations are today. And you can find a lot of that on the Abraham's Legacy website. And James can post the URL for that, so you have a link. In Ezekiel 39 verse 1 it says, and you, son of man, prophesy against Gog, and say, thus says Adonai Yahovah, behold, I am against you, O Gog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and I will turn you about and drive you forward and bring you up from the uttermost parts of the north and lead you against the mountains of Israel. Then I will strike your bow from your left hand and will make your arrows drop out of your right hand. You shall fall on the mountains of Israel, you and all your hordes and the peoples who are with you. I will give you to birds of prey of every sort and to the beasts of the field to be devoured. You shall fall in an open field, for I have spoken, declares Adonai Yahovah. And I will send fire on Magog and on those who dwell securely in the coastlands, and they will know that I am Yehovah. Right? He does this to prove his supremacy, to prove that he is the only living God. In my holy name I will make known in the midst of my people Israel, and I will not let my holy name be profaned anymore. He's done. And the nations shall know that I am Yehovah, the Holy One in Israel. Behold, it is coming, and it will be brought about, declares Adonai Yahovah. Actually, this is, what is that? That's, pardon me one second. Yes, Adonai Yahovah, sorry. Behold, it is coming, and it will be brought about, declares Adonai Yahovah. That is the day of which I have spoken. Then those who dwell in the cities of Israel will go out and make fires of the weapons and burn them, shields and bucklers, bows and arrows, clubs and spears, and they will make fires of them for 7 years, so that they will not need to take wood out of the field or cut down any out of the forest. For they will make their fires of the weapons. They will seize the spoil of those who despoiled them and plunder those who plundered them, declares Adonai Yahovah. On that day I will give to Gog a place for burial in Israel, the valley of the travelers, east of the sea. It will block the travelers, for there Gog and all his multitude will be buried. It will be called the valley of Hamon Gog. For 7 months the house of Israel will be burying them in order to cleanse the land. All the people of the land will bury them, and I will bring them renown on the day that I show my glory, declares Adonai Yehovah. They will set apart men to travel through the land regularly, to bury those travelers remaining on the face of the land so as to clean it. At the end of 7 months, they will make their search. And when these travel through the land, and anyone sees a human bone, then he shall set up a sign by it, till the buriers have buried it in the valley of Hamon-Gog. Hamona is also the name of the city. Thus shall they cleanse the land. As for you, son of man, thus says Adonai Yehovah, speak to the birds and every sort and to all beasts of the field. Assemble and come, gather from all around to the sacrificial feast that I am preparing for you, a great sacrificial feast on the mountains of Israel, and you shall eat flesh and drink blood. You shall eat the flesh of the mighty and drink the blood of the princes of the earth, of rams, of lambs, and of he-goats, of bulls, all of them fat beasts of Bashan. And you shall eat fat till you are filled, and drink blood till you are drunk, at the sacrificial feast that I am preparing for you. And you shall be filled at my table with horses and charioteers, with mighty men and all kinds of warriors, declares Adonai Yehovah. And I will set my glory among the nations, and all the nations shall see my judgment that I have executed, and my hand that I have laid on them. The house of Israel shall know that I am Adonai their Elohim. Yehovah their Elohim, from that day forward. And the nations shall know that the house of Israel went into captivity for their iniquity, because they dealt so treacherously. Now, iniquity is perverseness. It's perversion and immorality. That's what the Hebrew word means. Because they dealt so treacherously with me that I hid my face from them and gave them into the hand of their adversaries, and they fell by the sword. I dealt with them according to their uncleanness and their transgressions, and hid my face from them. Therefore, thus says Adonai Yehovah, now I will restore the fortunes of Jacob, and have mercy on the whole house of Israel, Judah, Israel included, all inclusive, and I will be jealous for my holy name. They shall forget their shame and all the treachery they have practiced against me, when they dwell securely in their land, and none make them afraid. When I have brought them back to the peoples, or from the peoples, and gathered them from their enemies' lands, and through them have vindicated my holiness in the sight of many nations. Then they shall know that I am Yehovah their Elohim, because I sent them into exile among the nations, and then assembled them into their own land. I will leave none of them remaining among the nations any more. And I will not hide my face any more from them when I pour out my spirit upon the house of Israel, declares Adonai Yehovah. And then carrying on in I forgot that was supposed to start in 38. Did I cover 38? I did. Yes. All right, so we'll stop there. Anyway, there's a lot of interesting end-time prophecies regarding Israel and some of the nations that we see in the Middle East. It's certainly something for us to keep our eyes on and make sure that we have at least some knowledge of the prophecies involved. It's important, I think, for us to understand these things. Okay, so with that, we'll have our last hymn, and then I'd like to ask Mr. Jerry Shaleski if he would close in prayer. So if you will turn to page 29, we'll sing a hymn that comes from Psalm 37 titled Rest in Yahweh, after which, as I said, I'd like to ask Mr. Jerry Shaleski if he would close in prayer. Okay, if you'll remain standing for the closing prayer, we'll turn the mic over to Mr. Jerry Shaleski. Jerry?
Sound check, please.
Sounds good.
Heavenly Father, Jehovah host, we have come before you this day, the day thou hast set aside for us to stop and pause and pray before thee and worship thee throughout the day and to glorify thee and to remove our foot from our pleasure that we may get rested and refreshed. We come before thy presence, reading thy prophecies, and pray for understanding and guidance, that we do what's right in thy eyes and do thy will. We ask for guidance and correction. It is our greatest desire to love thee and have no other gods before thee, and to show that love for thee with obedience and faith and with charity, walking humbly before thee as our Creator and our Father. We give you the deepest respect and glory and honor that we know of to give to thee. We ask you to bless this work and guide us. And we ask you for, as it be thou will, to heal us of any unnecessary disease and sickness. And watch over and guide thy servants and keep them from harm's way. And may our families and their children abide in the shadow of thee. We ask this, Father, in the name of thy beloved Son, Yahushua the Christ. Amen.